Everyone is talking about the new weight loss miracle shot. Celebrities are shrinking overnight, and the drug is selling out globally. But what if I told you that you don't need a $1,000 a month injection because your body already has the biological hardware to produce this exact same weight loss hormone natively? Today, we are exposing the GLP-1 secret. This video is for educational purposes only. Always consult with a healthcare professional before making drastic changes to your diet, especially if you have a medical condition like diabetes or thyroid issues. And I want to begin with something important. I understand why this topic is exploding. When people are fighting insulin resistance, constant hunger, and stubborn fat gain, the promise of rapid appetite control is incredibly tempting. The drug at the center of this conversation is semaglutide, a GLP-1 receptor agonist. In plain English, it is a synthetic compound designed to activate the same receptor that native GLP-1 uses in the body. The FDA describes semaglutide as a GLP-1 receptor agonist, and it notes that semaglutide lowers fasting and postprandial glucose, reduces body weight, and delays gastric emptying. That delayed gastric emptying is one reason people feel full so quickly. It can be helpful, but it also explains why so many users complain about nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, and other gastrointestinal effects. The FDA label says gastrointestinal adverse reactions occur more often with Ozempic than placebo, and that severe gastrointestinal adverse reactions have been reported. It also says Ozempic is not recommended in patients with severe gastroparesis. Now, let me be precise. The reason this drug works is not magic. It is pharmacology. Semaglutide is a GLP-1 analog with very high similarity to human GLP-1, and it activates the GLP-1 receptor, which is the target for native GLP-1. The body's own GLP-1 is a physiological hormone involved in glucose regulation and satiety signaling. That is why people are so fascinated by this class of drugs. It can quiet food noise, it can blunt appetite, it can make meals feel smaller. But that same effect is also why many people end up under-eating protein, under-eating essential nutrients, and losing more lean mass than they realize during rapid weight loss. Recent reviews have raised concern about reductions in lean mass during GLP-1-based weight loss, even when fat loss is the primary goal. And this is where the conversation gets even more interesting, because the biological truth is that your body already makes GLP-1 naturally. Human GLP-1 is produced by intestinal L cells, and the gut microbiome can influence GLP-1 secretion through short-chain fatty acids, or SCFAs, which are produced when beneficial microbes ferment dietary fiber. In other words, the gut is not just a digestion tube. It is an endocrine organ. It communicates with your brain, your pancreas, and your appetite centers every single day. So the real question is not, how do I force my appetite off with a synthetic injection? The real question is, how do I support the biology that naturally creates satiety? That is the lens for this entire masterclass. We are going to focus on nutrient density, protein sufficiency, fiber diversity, and microbiome support, not starvation. Because when you chronically underfuel the body, you do not build a stronger metabolism. You make it harder to preserve lean muscle mass, stable energy, and long-term metabolic resilience. So in the next chapter, I will show you exactly how to stimulate your body's own GLP-1 response with food, gut health, and a smarter metabolic strategy, without the rebound, without the hype, and without turning your body into a shell of itself. Let us be very precise here. The problem is not that semaglutide is fake in some cartoonish sense. The problem is that it is pharmacologically powerful. Semaglutide is a GLP-1 receptor agonist, which means it activates the GLP-1 receptor and intentionally amplifies signals associated with satiety and glucose control. The FDA also notes that semaglutide delays gastric emptying and is associated with gastrointestinal adverse reactions, sometimes severe. In clinical practice, That is why some people feel like their stomach is moving in slow motion. Nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, abdominal pain, reflux-type symptoms, and sometimes such severe motility issues that the drug is not recommended in patients with severe gastroparesis. People online call this GI paralysis, but the clinically accurate phrase is severe gastrointestinal adverse reactions with delayed gastric emptying. And yes, that appetite shutdown is exactly why the drug can be effective for weight loss. But effectiveness is not the same thing as metabolic health. When appetite is suppressed too aggressively, many people simply eat less of everything, especially protein, minerals, and total calories needed to preserve lean tissue. That becomes a problem when the goal is not just scale weight loss, but fat loss with metabolic integrity. This is where the muscle loss conversation matters. In weight loss studies with semaglutide, body composition does improve in the right direction for fat mass. But lean mass is also affected, which is why muscle preservation must be part of the conversation. A review of semaglutide and lean mass concluded that while weight loss is driven primarily by fat mass reduction, there are legitimate concerns about reductions in lean mass as well. Another body composition study in adults with overweight or obesity found semaglutide was associated with reduced fat mass and visceral fat mass, while also showing changes in lean tissue. That matters because lean muscle mass is not decoration. It is your glucose sink. It is your insulin-sensitive tissue. It is one of the major engines that helps determine whether your metabolism stays resilient or becomes fragile. So when someone loses weight rapidly on a GLP-1 drug but does not protect protein intake, resistance training, and overall nourishment, they may lose more than they intended. The face can look more hollow. The body can look flatter. The scale can go down while metabolic strength quietly erodes. That is the hidden trade-off people do not hear enough about. Now, for the rebound problem. This is the part almost nobody wants to talk about until it happens to them. The Step 1 trial extension documented what happened after semaglutide was withdrawn. Participants regained weight, and cardiometabolic improvements deteriorated after stopping treatment. In other words, the drug had been suppressing appetite and helping drive weight loss, but once the synthetic signal was removed, the system did not just politely stay fixed. The biology pushed back. That rebound is not a moral failure. It is physiology. If the medication is acting like a throttle on appetite, and you never built the food structure, protein foundation, resistance training habit, and gut support to sustain the outcome, then the stop date becomes the trapdoor. Appetite comes back. Food noise returns. And if lean mass was lost during the rapid loss phase, the body is now working from a weaker metabolic platform. That is why the post-drug phase matters just as much as the drug phase. The real question is not, can I lose weight fast? The real question is, can I keep fat off while preserving muscle, thyroid output, energy, and long-term metabolic stability? So the dark side of synthetic GLP-1 is not that it never works. It does work. The dark side is that it can work in a way that is disconnected from the deeper biology of nourishment, muscle preservation, and sustainable appetite control. And that is exactly why the next chapter matters so much. Here is the part that changes the entire conversation. Your body already makes GLP-1 naturally. GLP-1 is a gut hormone produced in response to food intake, and it helps signal the pancreas to release insulin, reduce glucagon, slow digestion, and reduce appetite. In other words, GLP-1 is part of your normal satiety circuitry. The intestine is not passive. It is an endocrine organ. And one of the key cell types involved is the enteroendocrine L cell, which secretes GLP-1 and other appetite-regulating peptides. That is the biological truth most people never hear. The goal is not to force the body into silence with an artificial override. The goal is to support the body's own satiety network so that hunger becomes regulated, stable, and predictable again. When the gut is working well, satiety is not just a willpower issue. It is a hormone issue. It is a signaling issue. It is a microbiome issue. Now here is the mechanism that makes this so powerful. Fiber and the gut microbiome matter. When beneficial microbes ferment dietary fiber, they produce short-chain fatty acids, or SCFAs. Those SCFAs can stimulate L cells and enhance GLP-1 secretion. This is not a wellness slogan. This is a real gut endocrine pathway described in the literature. In fact, research has shown that SCFAs can trigger calcium signaling in L cells and increase GLP-1 release, linking fiber fermentation to satiety hormone output. That means your plate can influence your hormones, not by magic, by biology. A fiber-rich diet feeds the microbial ecosystem that produces SCFAs, and those SCFAs help signal the intestinal L cells to release more of the body's own satiety hormones. That is one of the reasons whole food eating can feel dramatically different from ultra-processed eating. The signal is stronger, the appetite is calmer. The meal leaves a trace of stability instead of a crash. Protein is the other major lever. High-protein meals are associated with greater satiety, and clinical studies have shown that protein intake can increase post-meal GLP-1 and PYY responses. That matters because satiety is not just about eating less. It is about giving the body enough of the right inputs so it can stop searching for food every hour. When protein is adequate, the body has more support for lean muscle maintenance, and the meal itself sends a stronger fullness signal. This is why I keep coming back to the phrase nutrient density, not punishment, not deprivation, not earning food by starving all day. We are trying to restore the signals that tell the brain we are fed, we are safe, we can now burn fuel efficiently. That is a very different metabolic message from chronic undereating. And this is why starvation or extreme fasting is dangerous. The body does not interpret chronic deprivation as healing. It interprets it as stress. Research on fasting and calorie restriction shows metabolic adaptation, reduced energy expenditure, and changes in thyroid-related energy regulation. That means the body can become more efficient at conserving fuel, not less. So the objective is never to crush appetite by starving yourself. The objective is to build a metabolism that can stay steady, preserve lean muscle mass, and naturally support GLP-1 signaling through food, fiber, and gut health. So the lesson is simple. GLP-1 is not only a drug story, it is a gut story, a microbiome story, and a nourishment story. And once you understand that, you stop chasing shortcuts and start rebuilding the biology. Now let us turn this into something practical. A GLP-1 stimulating meal is not a starvation meal. It is a structured, nutrient-dense meal that gives your gut, your pancreas, and your brain the right signals at the right time. The most reliable pattern is simple. Build around non-starchy vegetables, lean protein, and quality carbohydrates, then use healthy fats as a support, not the centerpiece. That is consistent with the diabetes plate framework used by the ADA and NIDK. Half the plate non-starchy vegetables, 1/4 lean protein, and 1/4 high-fiber carbohydrate foods. This matters because a meal that is built this way naturally favors satiety, steadier glucose, and better adherence. It is not about eating less and suffering more. It is about eating in a way that gives your biology a better message. The first priority is protein. A very practical target is roughly 25 to 30 grams of high-quality protein per meal, because that range is commonly associated with strong muscle protein synthesis and satiety support. In older and clinical nutrition literature, 2 to 3 meals per day with about 25-30 grams of high-quality protein per meal has been described as an effective pattern for 24-hour muscle protein stimulation. Protein also supports fuller post-meal hormonal responses, including GLP-1 and PYY, which helps calm appetite without crashing energy. So think in real food, not numbers alone. Eggs, Greek yogurt, cottage cheese, fish, chicken, turkey, tofu, tempeh, lean beef, or a high-quality protein shake when necessary. The point is to make protein the anchor of the meal so you protect lean muscle mass while you're trying to improve insulin resistance. That is especially important because preserving muscle helps preserve metabolic flexibility. Next comes fiber, and this is where the GLP-1 story becomes deeply biological. Fiber feeds the gut microbes that ferment it into short-chain fatty acids, and those SCFAs are part of the signal that can stimulate L cells to release GLP-1. Research has shown that SCFAs can directly trigger GLP-1 secretion, and broader reviews support the role of fiber in producing SCFAs that influence glucose regulation and gut hormone signaling. So the move is not remove everything enjoyable. The move is to add fiber strategically. Leafy greens, broccoli, asparagus, lentils, beans, chia seeds, flaxseed, berries, and oats. For people with diabetes or insulin resistance, current guidance also emphasizes high-fiber carbohydrates and a fiber-rich plate pattern. In fact, ADA-linked guidance notes that adults with diabetes should aim for high-fiber foods, and Endotext summarizes recommendations around at least 14 grams of fiber per 1,000 calories. Finally, keep the meal balanced enough to stabilize blood sugar without overloading the system. For insulin resistance, the objective is not to eliminate all carbohydrates. The objective is to choose quality carbohydrates, pair them with protein and fiber, and maintain enough total nourishment to preserve lean muscle mass. The diabetes plate model is useful because it keeps the focus on food structure instead of obsession, counting, or deprivation. That is the key difference between a meal that supports recovery and a meal that keeps the body in survival mode. So here is the simplest GLP-1 meal formula. Protein first, fiber next, smart carbs in the right amount, and no starvation logic. That combination supports satiety, supports muscle, and gives your gut the raw materials it needs to help produce the satiety signals your body already knows how to make. Now we get to the root layer. You cannot expect your body to produce strong, healthy GLP-1 signaling if the gut environment that supports that signaling is weakened. SCFAs are produced when gut microbes ferment dietary fiber, and those SCFAs are part of the pathway that can stimulate GLP-1 secretion from intestinal L cells. In other words, the microbiome is not a side character in metabolism. It is part of the signaling machinery itself. That means the real protocol is not obsession. It is rebuilding capacity. If someone has been living on low-fiber, ultra-processed food, eating erratically and under-recovering, the gut ecosystem often becomes less diverse and less metabolically helpful. The first move is always food. More fiber diversity, more real meals, and enough protein to protect lean tissue while the gut is being restored. That is the foundation. And I want to be very clear. This is not about claiming that one supplement can replace the work. It cannot, but it can be a support layer when the goal is to make the gut environment more friendly to satiety signaling, stable digestion, and better routine adherence. This is where a microbiome support supplement can enter the conversation. Leanbiome's official site describes it as a scientifically supported blend of dietary and prebiotic fibers and a trace mineral developed by OptiBiotics, and says it is designed to support a diverse microbiome and bridge the fiber gap many adults never close. Now, I need to keep the science honest. Probiotic research for weight management is mixed. A systematic review found limited efficacy for probiotics in reducing body weight and BMI, while newer reviews suggest there may be some benefit in certain populations. But the effect is not a miracle and should not be oversold. So the right way to think about a product like this is as an adjunct to a high-fiber, protein-sufficient, blood sugar-stable lifestyle, not as a replacement for it. That is why the most credible strategy is simple. Use food to create the signal, use the microbiome to amplify the signal, and use a support formula only if it helps you stay consistent. That is how you move from appetite chaos to metabolic order. So here is the takeaway. If the gut ecosystem is underfed, underdiversified, and undersupported, GLP-1 signaling will not be as robust as it could be. But when you feed the microbiome with real fiber, protect lean muscle with enough protein, and reduce the chaos of starvation-style dieting, you begin to restore the body's native satiety machinery. If your situation is complicated by diabetes, thyroid disease, digestive disorders, or medication use, this is exactly the moment to involve your endocrinologist or primary clinician. That is not a formality, it is the correct medical step. And if you are considering a microbiome support product such as leanbiome, treat it as one piece of a broader plan built on food quality, fiber intake, protein sufficiency, sleep, and resistance training. This video is for educational purposes only. Always consult with a healthcare professional before making drastic changes to your diet, especially if you have a medical condition like diabetes or thyroid issues.